So, Chris,
Hey, Chris.
welcome.
Hey, how's it going? Glad to be here.
All great here. All good. Hope you are ready. So let's pop up your screen. I have it here in the back. Let's great. And I would just simply say the floor is yours. Hit it.
Hey, how's it going? Chris Russell. I'm going to be doing a talk here called AppSec for Everyone. This is really kind of just a foundational base kind of talk on some of the best practices, some of the pitfalls, some of the ways to get things off the ground for leaders and some of the other non-technical stakeholders. So right off the bat, here's the contents of what we'll be going through. Why AppSec, components, evolution, trends, best practices, pitfalls, conclusions, and the questions. Right off the bat, why AppSec? Now you're on this, you're on this stream, so obviously you know something about AppSec, you know something about DevSecOps, it's an interest of yours. But let's really talk about like why this is exploding right now. Previously, there was a small amount of organizations that were in AppSec or developing apps at all. It was just Silicon Valley type companies, but now we're seeing this kind of everywhere. And now that all organizations are dealing with apps and different things to support their services, this introduces a host of different security issues and things that people can consider. So AppSec, we're taking best practices, security software, hardware, techniques, putting this all together, try and protect their computers from any sort of external threats. Any sort of insecure application can be exploited fraudulently. This can lead to data infiltration or exfiltration, financial, crypto exfiltration, proprietary data being stolen, customer data, PII, all the things that we want to avoid and what we're trying to protect against. I'm also kind of feel like fraud and cybersecurity kind of come together in this regard. These things have previously been very distinguished in organizations, and I'm seeing fraud teams and infosec teams in regards to AppSec having to work a little bit closer together because of the fraud aspect of it. Now, like I was saying before, everyone's got an app now. Even if you have a toaster, they're going to give you an app as a a support service. You can do it from bed or whatnot. So we're seeing just an explosion of companies that have never been in apps before getting involved in this space. Now, a lot of people outsource it, and that's fine, but a lot of people want to do this in-house. And so they push out their MVP, they do what they got to do to kind of get that off the ground, but they were baking security in after the fact. We all know that's just not a recipe for success. So what we want to do is bake it in early. Everyone's heard shift left. That's what we're really shooting for. And some of these new organizations that are getting into it now, they're actually at an advantage because previously it was a very manual process. There weren't a lot of tools that helped automate it. There wasn't a lot of support to create a great CI/CD pipeline. It was very, it just wasn't smooth and efficient because we just didn't have the tools. So now people getting into it, they can actually get through and do the fundamentals of AppSec a lot easier than before. Just even in the last 5 years, what we have available now makes putting AppSec in the CI/CD pipeline super easy. So let's go through some of the components of AppSec for pipelines. So first of all, like any other programming off the ground, you need to kind of do your research. You need to understand your organization. You need to understand how you support your organization and go collect information on that. But on top of that, you want to talk to the teams involved. You want to talk to the people that are going to be using this day to day and really understand their workflow, understand their release cycle, all these things. Because what you want to do again is support the company's ability to deliver apps and not make security a roadblock. As soon as it's a roadblock, people are going to go around it. People are not going to buy into it, and your program is going to be at risk of just not functioning the way it's supposed to be. So let's talk about some of the components. There's a stakeholder communications. Like you said, you're about to roll something out. You're about to insert something else into someone's process. You need to talk to the people involved in that so they understand this is coming. You need a threat model, so we understand what we're looking at as far as vulnerabilities, what our company's priorities are. Fit that into it. You got to do an application inventory, so you're covering all your applications. If you're only doing some sort of AppSec for 20% of your organization, you're not really covering what you need to cover. Application architecture, understand kind of how everything's built together, how everything's intertwined, what services talk together, what workloads talk together. Program strategy, again, as a CISO, I have to sit down and think like, what's the strategy of a program? What's the ultimate outcome we're trying to get to? You need some assessment tools, vulnerability management, documentation, and continuous improvement. Let's talk about some of the building blocks for AppSec. Now, again, my view is that almost all organizations have to kind of tailor fit their program to support the organization. You can't just cookie cutter and copy paste what someone else is doing. Otherwise, it's just not going to fit. But there's these building blocks, and you can use these interchangeably to kind of build out what you need for your org. The secure software development lifecycle, Git, CI/CD pipeline, containers, infrastructure as code, the SaaS, DAS, and all different scanning tools, and some pen tests. These are things you can take together to build a pretty good AppSec program. Like I said, where you put these in the process, if you're pen testing first, if you're pen testing continuously, that's all really dependent on the workflow of your developers and your organization. But these are just some of the main components you need to be familiar with and ready to hopefully utilizing to secure your apps. Let's talk about the evolution of AppSec. It was, like I mentioned before, it was a lot harder before than it is now. So before, there was a lot of manual code review. It was very cumbersome, time consuming. It took not just developer time, but senior developer time to sit down and look at junior developers' work. It's a very costly and inefficient way of doing it. Then we moved to the spreadsheets for days. We were taking them stuff from the code review, putting in all these spreadsheets, tracking vulnerabilities with these spreadsheets that would just become just ever longer because it's such an inefficient system. You just keep adding to the vulnerabilities, keep adding to the issues, and you're very little not chipping away at them very well because it's you don't have any sort of automated process. Whereas these days you can have automated merge requests and reports and all these things, automatic remediations. You can't automate everything, but you can automate enough of the small pieces that frees you up to kind of then do the stuff you need to do to tackle the more one-offs and harder things that you need to improve for the AppSec. So, things like patching and whatnot, it doesn't have to be cumbersome now like it was just even 5 years ago. Let's talk about some of the trends right now in AppSec. So, like I mentioned before, previously very cumbersome, very manual. Now we're starting to embed tools into the DevOps teams. We're talking, container security. Containers first came out. There wasn't a lot of thought products or kind of knowledge around how to harden the containers. Infrastructure as a code security, again, if Terraform comes out, everyone's using it, but no one's really sitting down and other than manually kind of reviewing things and then pen testing afterwards, thinking about infrastructure as a code security itself. Is there hard-coded secrets in there? Is there things that just don't need to be in the in the code itself, or need to be referenced differently? These are all relatively new things that make us much more secure, but even just a couple of years ago, it was a very manual process. You want to aggregate vulnerability management process. Again, there's scanners and different types of vulnerability management tools. It seems like you might have to have 2 or 3 to cover all aspects of it. That's starting to get consolidated, and that's a good sign for the overall process. SaaS and DAS integration, again, these used to be not very great tools in the last 10 years. Now they're becoming amazing, and now they're starting to get integrated and kind of do more than just one piece of the pie. Continuous cloud app monitoring. Again, since everything in the cloud's an API call, a lot of products are figuring out it's very easy to kind of figure out every single thing that's happened, every single action, and monitoring that to a good degree, whether it's AWS, GCP, Azure. There's a ton of different ways to plug into every single thing that's going on in your environment via API and getting some really rich, good use case alerts on when things are kind of deviation from the norm or clear violations of some rules you have set up. API security. API security is another one where a lot of people barely had API documentation, barely had schemas, never mind any sort of security around it. Now that people like Melissa and I have gone through and shown how easily they can hack financial institutions via APIs, they're starting to see a lot of process talk tools around this, and I think that's a really great thing. Functional AppSec testing, again, not something in the past that was super prevalent. Now we got probably got tons of options on tools and how you can do that. Curated vulnerability lists. Now this is something that isn't necessarily a product. This is something that I kind of preach. The way I feel is when you have an AppSec program, the security team should be basically curating the vulnerability list for the developers, so they don't have to figure out themselves what the priorities are. So you don't just sit there and run something like Snyk, get like, hey, there's 10 criticals, 20 highs, 40 mediums. You don't just sit on a list of that and say go do good things. You need to sit there, especially at first, and go, okay, of all these things, these are the ones that you can remediate. These are the ones that have known exploits. These are the ones that blah blah blah. And you actually curate and give them a prioritized list, so they know what to tackle first. If they have limited time, if they only 10% of their sprint cycle, they know. And so security teams really got to kind of pick up the slack on that, and give guidance to the developers. Over time, the developers may pick up on it and may be able to kind of run with it, but the security team's got to at least get that off the ground. DAS becoming more real time. Again, there was usually some delays on that, but now that we have continuous kind of dynamic testing that can go on in real time environments, we get a lot more updated, faster kind of intel on what's vulnerable on environment. That's a really good thing. Let's talk about some of the best practices. Start small. Everyone wants to plug in a tool, automate everything, and what they end up doing is end up automating a lot of noise, end up alienating a lot of people, because all of a sudden they've got, whether it's email alerts or Slack alerts or whatever it is, they end up getting bombarded with, okay, you've got 12,000 vulnerabilities because it's the first time you plug this in. That's just going to turn people off. So start small, start with a couple of projects, start with a small amount of people, clean up the noise before you start just pushing it out wide. You gotta have release control. It's kind of fundamental. A lot of people don't have any sort of, or I wouldn't say a lot of people kind of fudge the process on that and kind of have some workarounds. Try and keep that strict so that everything's, through the pipeline, and you don't have ways of having a side branch or something else that can still go to prod. Continuous improvement, whether it's fail fast or whatever your methodology is. You want to be able to, fix things and innovate really fast. You want a nice clean pipeline that, you can run, through test to staging at prod really quickly, but also hit all your security checks. Define success early and often. As far as the AppSec program, you got to have a goal, and it's not just be secure, because that's too vague. You got to talk about specifically in our org, this is what our goal is for Q1 with our AppSec program, especially if you're just setting up the ground. We want to reduce developer time by, patch management time by this. We want to reduce whatever it is. Have specific goals so you can define success and communicate those to leaders. And above all, support the developers. Again, this is something that makes a lot more work for them. They're just going to find ways around it. It's kind of human nature. Some of the pitfalls. Automating everything first. Again, it's second nature. If we can automate it, let's do that. But until you understand it, until you understand the ramifications, understand the scope of what you're setting up, if you automate everything, you might end up pushing some patches that end up breaking things because you haven't patched other dependencies or whatever it is. So start off walking, or crawling. Crawl, walk, run is kind of my take on anything with this. Don't overwhelm developers. If you're not prioritizing vulns, you might have people spending a lot of time fixing things that aren't even really a concern compared to things that are more critical. So you have to have prioritization in there. It can't just be a list of thousands of vulns and they have to figure it out. Not considering mitigating controls. There are some things that are so locked down by 10 other controls, the security team can say, you know what, this one can take a minute you can patch this later, we can upgrade this later, we can upgrade the dependencies later on this, because not only is this behind the WAF and the Palo Alto firewall, and it's got EDR on it, and I've got 10 other tools on it, the likelihood of this vulnerability even executing, because it's whatever it is totally mitigated by these other controls. So AppSec is still a section of your overall information security, and make sure you're thinking about what else you have around it, and taking and using that in your assessment. Not knowing what apps you have, that's again comes down to the basics of information security. Have some sort of asset inventory. In this case, it's your apps. Not working with product. Again, you need to understand what your product's trying to achieve. You need to understand the goal of the product team, and you need to support them, because if there's no product, there's no InfoSec team. If there's no InfoSec team, there's no AppSec program. Accumulating too much technical debt. This is a very common one. Again, sometimes because you come in as a new leader and all of a sudden you plug in some tools and you find out that things haven't been updated in a very long time. Work to do that, but then set up a program where you don't find yourself in those shoes again. death by Excel spreadsheets. I find a lot of times we have all these great fancy tools that they've got great reports, and we're still pulling everything into Excel spreadsheets. I prefer, like, hey, give people links to the actual report, give people links to the actual alert. Don't start creating a whole other system to track systems that are trackable within themselves. Try and take advantage of those, because people don't like manually cutting and pasting things into a sheet if you can export something. So work with that. Not having a process for emergency prod pushes. Again, if your pipeline's so kind of backed up with all these processes, you can't have a way to get something through an emergency to get yourself back up during, trading hours, or e-commerce site during business hours. Then and the company starts losing a lot of money because there's so many gates for security to get to prod to fix that, then you're going to find yourself at risk of losing some of that, because you have to support the business first above all. Poor documentation. You may have a really great process, and then you may lose one or two key people, an architect, a senior DevOps person, and all of a sudden there's lost tribal knowledge, and no one knows how to fix something in the pipeline because there's one-off on a certain thing, and that just leads to failure. So definitely focus on documentation. So in conclusion, start with the basics, slowly improve programs over time, consider the time required for the developers and the product team, using the infrastructure team as a curator of what's important and not, enable other teams to embrace secure development practices. And with that, I am done. As long as there's no questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. I think there's one question, and that is probably an opinion here. If there were 3 top metrics people should monitor, what would they be? What is your take on that?
I'm going to say it's pretty org specific, but I'll sit there and kind of figure out generically. I would say you got to have something around timing on your merge request process. Something around timing as far as is there any delays to developers being able to push their stuff to test, staging, and prod? You gotta see where you gotta have metrics around where it's getting caught up in that process to make sure that there's no one part in there that's kind of weaker than others, that there's just lost inefficient time. I would say overall, I don't want to say things like vulnerabilities over time, but something that shows that you're actually decreasing the amount of total vulnerabilities in the environment, as opposed to just constantly adding and on a losing scale. I remember years ago, I was dealing with Tenable in a different situation. It's not necessarily AppSec, but the list of vulnerabilities just always increased, and the customer I was dealing with was chipping away at like 10%. It was going up by like 20%. And I sat down and said to him, like, look, we need to fundamentally change how we're approaching this, because if the list is getting longer and we're only chipping it very slowly, it's just going to, not only you're showing not progress, you're showing negative process, and that's not going to be a good story for you and your leaders. So something to show improvements there. Lastly, I would say something around how efficient your pipeline is and rooting out the issues before it goes to production. So if you're taking care of everything in staging and prod, and you're fixing these dependencies, in staging then you should have less emergency pushes in prod for vulnerability type things. If you're doing everything right in your pipeline, there should be less emergency. Hey, we have to do a patch to prod because we didn't take care of it. We didn't catch it in staging a test. It happens after the fact. Sometimes we don't even know about a vulnerability, so it's in production, Log4j and Spring Boot, like that happens. But that should be the exception, not the rule.
Thank you so much. One thing, like one comment in the chat, like really insightful talk. So people loved it. Thank you so much for doing this. And I think if you have more questions, feel free to go to our Discord channel and put up the questions there. Either Chris or somebody else who is also involved in that same area can answer them for you. So Chris, I want to thank you for this. The talk was well received. I think it's a great way to at least get some pointers how to start with AppSec. So thank you for that, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Have a good one.